My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. Okay. But poetry is basically the one and only cure to all ailments. Read poetry, it will cure your cancer. Read poetry, you will stop hearing the voices. This is not medical advice. This is not true. Don't do that. Don't self-medicate with poetry, y'all. It usually just makes you sadder. Alright. I'm not alone. Felt. For as long as there are birds in the sky, worms in the dirt, lizards on my fence, I will never be alone. The world will always be full of life, and I must only step out my door to see it. The trees grow taller and the grass grows thicker. The flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. But I am not alone. For nature will always win in the end. Vines will one day climb the walls of my room. Birds will nest in my pillowcase, and irises will sprout in my carpet. I must only live another day to see it. I like it. It's kind of Mary Oliver. Damn poetry will cure me of my schizophrenia. Who would have thunk it? I wish it could, because I know multiple people who, if I could write a poem, if I could put in 100 hours to write a perfect, beautiful poem, right? And it would cure someone's schizophrenia, it would make someone's life easier, I would do it. To understand my fic, I must first go back to September of 93. Oh my gosh. You can give me deeper context to your fanfic when we go over it. Because I will not remember that. It's not that I'm not interested. It is just a lot. So, take my hormones tonight. I did. You said that the title's not really related, but it seems pretty related. Drowning Devil. Wait, did you say that? I think you said that. When did you say that? Am I, hallucinating chats? Oh, no, you did. I'm quite a fan of the poem, but the title has not much to do with it. Okay, we're good. Title. I like the title. It's cute. You said that. I'm gonna read it again, because that's what we do. I'm not alone. For as long as there are birds in the sky, worms in the dirt, lizards on my fence, I will never be alone. The world will always be full of life, and I must only step out my door to see it. The trees grow taller, and the grass grows thicker. The flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. But I am not alone, for nature will always win in the end. Vines will one day climb the walls of my room, birds will nest in my pillowcase, and irises will sprout in my carpet. I must only live another day to see it. I like poems about nature a lot, so that was, well, neat. I like poems about nature a lot. I think most poets like poems about nature. Big fans. And what do I want to talk about? I am not alone. That seems like a line that could give us some amount of discussion. For as long as there are birds in the sky, worms in the dirt, this is on my face, I will never be alone. The world will always be full of life. Oh, I like this. Somehow I didn't, put together that you say, I'm not alone multiple times. I must only step out my door to see it. The trees grow taller, and the grass grows thicker. The flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. I'll be left here in this house, but I am not alone, for nature will always win in the end. Vines will one day climb the walls of my room. Birds will nest in my pillowcase. What a really cute line. Cute and really good. I know sometimes cute sounds demeaning. I like this line a lot. And irises will sprout in my carpet. Me with the only capacity I have to tell you that irises I must only live another day to see it. Okay, so I think this is interesting, right? Actually, the main point of interest for me. This sounds like something Pamela Isley from the Batman series would write. You're very, televised media savvy, it sounds like. Celestial. I'm personally not generally a watcher of on the TV media, but I do find it valid and fascinating, and it's definitely a nice change of pace to hear that kind of stuff. Who's Pamela Isley? So, I must only live another day to see it. Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms. So I think it's interesting, right? We have this really sort of skewed sense of time. Poison ivy. I see. Pamela Isley, poison ivy. That's alliteration, and it rhymes. That's crazy. You have a really, I don't really watch TV. Not sure if that's a compliment or not. I think it's a compliment because she's the nature girl. Kind of poison. It's interesting. I think that's actually a really, really fascinating point because she's a villain, right? And there is a sense of death in this poem, and an amount of the day will come. You have this really skewed thing where I must only live another day to experience this very long overtaking of nature and the birds and the plants moving in and taking over and encroaching, right? And then also never be alone, right? These are very long-term temporal words. When I see words like never or always and even one day, never and always are surprisingly temporal, which I think a lot of people don't realize, where never be alone is kind of referring to forever, right? That's obviously what it means, but I think people don't necessarily process the connection that this often is then associated with death and mortality. Until I die. For a person, never is just until I die. Except this also maybe isn't.
because it's also about nature winning and reclaiming my life, my house, my existence in the end. Right? And I mean, sometimes, a lot of the times in poetry or in literature, the house, we've actually talked about this before. I've had multiple houses mentioned in poems on stream, but the house as a symbol can sometimes represent oneself, because the house or your room that you live in is pretty much a reflection of you. It's where you spend a lot of your time, right? You spend time in this place, and it reflects you. It has your personality, your decoration, your smell, so it's a very common symbol. So the fact that you do say that in time the house is going to be overtaken, right, by nature, perhaps have it be cradled in her arms. You could almost think of the vines climbing the walls. Or what I think of with these vines climbing the walls is that they are cradling the house, pulling it back down into Mother Nature. Right? Which I think makes this title maybe much more related to the poem than you indicated to me, right? But what do I know? So that's a very brief first impression. I'm going to do the customary self-care ad break every half hour, a minute and a half, and none of you are going to watch the ad, because ads are bad for your soul. Being advertised at is your time being used as a means for the creation of wealth and the pushing of a product. So don't watch the ads. Stand up, just as I am. You're not missing anything, because I stand up and walk around my room and stretch during these. So, yeah. Self-care. Good stuff. If the ad even runs, sometimes it just doesn't. What does this smell like? This blanket smells like something. Maybe it just smells like blanket? Like old blanket smell? Looks like it has a scent to it. Water. What if I put this over my shoulders? Then it'll stay. That's kind of true. Terminal yapper. Yeah, I'll get a very unfiltered Ginny today, because I just don't freaking have the energy to filter. Are the ads done? perhaps. We're back. Okay. Welcome back. I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus everywhere on the internet, and we are still looking at Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms, and we left off talking about death and houses. So I've written a lot. I feel like, and by written a lot, I mean thought a lot and not written anything about the idea of like sort of society, that which we live in. Society as it contrasts to nature. Now this of course is like a pretty common theme in poems, in works about nature, is the way that our existence kind of infringes upon the natural, and how the natural potentially infringes upon or also pulls back society through its just endless and powerful processes. Endless? Maybe. Anyway. That's obviously... No, nothing is obvious. Nothing is obvious. Sometimes I say the word obviously. And I shouldn't, because things are obvious to me. No, that's not where the dot goes. Right, some things are obvious to me, but I would say very little is obvious in writing. Right. And I need to get out of the habit of saying it, because some things are just fairly like, they make themselves apparent to me in looking at a piece of writing, but then at the same time I have people always asking me like, how do you analyze like this? I'm like, oh, it's just how it is. So I need to stop saying this. This is one of my not favorite words. I have a lot of least favorite words. We've talked about how I have a lot of favorite words on stream before. Obviously, least favorite, and by that I mean one of my least favorite, alongside never, always, probably bitch, one of my least favorite words. That's why I wrote a poem called that. I promise I'm gonna talk about your poem, Drowning Devil. Title. I think it's very funny. This is kind of random. I'm just yapping. I'm all over the place. I think it's funny that you always say like title, colon, at the title of your titles. I should ask after this how your poetry reading went. Oh yeah, we talked about it yesterday, but you probably weren't around on stream. Yeah, which is why we didn't read this. Yeah, I'll talk about it in a minute. There's a clip on my Instagram. Anyway, Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms. So this cycle is very important in like works about poetry, and this one particularly leans into like the works about nature. Did I say works about poetry? This one leans into the idea of nature reclaiming society, like this era, right? Not so much about our infringement. I mean, we have the house as a symbol of it, but you know, whatever. The flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. But I am not alone. So, I must step outside to see it. The trees grow taller, the grass grows thicker, the flowers bloom once again, and I will be left here inside this house. So if we're sectioning this poem, I would put a section, or I would say that this line is kind of dividing sections, and then somewhere here, that. Or like the line before. And I must only step out my door to see it, see the following things. Again, the world full of life. The trees grow taller, the grass grows thicker, the flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. So this is a very interesting line. Very, very interesting line, because I must only step out my door. Right? And all of this, I will have all of this, I will see all of this, and I will be left here in this house, which to me kind of implies that we are not doing this, we are not appreciating, we are not taking advantage of, we are not communing with nature, whatever word you want to use. I'm not sure. But I'm not alone, for nature will always win in the end. So even if I am in this house, even if I try to hide from it, not that I'm saying you're trying to hide, but even if I am holed up in a home, not kind of participating in nature, being a normal, modern human, I'm not alone. And that's like, oh, yay, that's comforting. Except the reason is for nature will always win in the end. People will die, right? Vines will one day climb the walls of my room. Birds will nest in my pillowcase, and irises will sprout in my carpet. I must only live another day to see it. And the last line is like fascinating, because all of this, all of these things, all of these overtaking of winning in the end of nature only happens upon your death, upon the abandonment of this home, upon society's downfall and collapse, or something. Upon not being kept up, right? I must only live another day to see it. I mean, another day to see this would be living a day past my own death / like society's death. Which is a really weird thing and a really like cool concept to live beyond, right? And there's a sense that, you know, like you are going to return to the dirt and get consumed into nature and feed all of this, and every part of you will be brought back into nature. If we want to go back to the house, the birds will nest in my pillowcase. If the house is a symbol of the self, then more so this says that nature will make use of my body. Nature will make use of me once I have died. Nature will claim me. Or nature will one day cradle me in her arms. Right? And so there's something comforting about that. The poem reads as comforting. I'm not alone, I will never be alone, I'm not alone. Right? Cradle me in her arms. It's not a violent thing. it's not necessarily a tormented death. It's not a sad thing. But it is death. It is decomposition, like you say. But it's natural. And I think that's interesting, because poetry does this cool thing where we can write about anything using any language. Not language as in different spoken languages, Spanish, English, whatever, but any language as in different, use of the English language, or whatever you're writing in, right? You can write about death and talk about it as natural and beautiful. You can write about death and talk about it as something violent and destructive and awful. You can write about death and talk about it as, something spiritual and beautiful and in remembrance. You can talk about death as anything. And these are all common ways to talk about death, right? It's common to talk about death through the lens of God. It's common to talk about death through nature and decomposition. It's less common, perhaps, to talk about death as intentional or as planned. You can talk about death as self-inflicted. You can talk about death as communal and suffocating, right? And I wouldn't say any of these are particularly radical ways to talk about death. Because you can also talk about death. You could write a poem that is purely happy and joking, talking about death, right? Some might read that as irony, some might read it as some sort of coping, but you can do that, right? It doesn't really matter, and sometimes it's hard to say, because we have a lot of metaphors in our language that are ingrained with death, returning to nature and decomposition, heaven, these kinds of things, right? Heaven is not metaphorical for everyone, of course. And we also have metaphors that don't work for death. We could talk about death as the building of something new as a poet. This is me going off the rails and not talking about your poem anymore. How would you do that? That's not a normal metaphor for death, or a normal way to describe it, but it is something we can do as poets, right? And that's cool, right? We can also use decomposition in bodies to talk about things other than death. And similarly, poetry is a place where we can talk about death as something that we can go beyond and isn't final, which this poem kind of does. Poem is not the end of things. It is returning to a mother and being cradled in her arms. It is having birds nest in your pillowcase. It is having irises sprout from your carpet. And in that sense, poetry can help us, because it can attach emotions like comfort like comfort, to something that is normally quite uncomfortable. And I can look at this poem, and now as I look at this poem and think about death, I'm struggling to worry as much as I normally would about death, because right now this interpretation is what is on my mind, right? This has in a sense helped me in this moment cope with the idea of my impending death, which happens to be something I personally worry about a lot. We're not going to talk about that right now. But you said you liked this poem, and I think you should, because it does this thing that theoretically we want to do. I mean, sometimes we want to write poems, to dig into the discomfort and the pain of death and the struggle and the sadness and the torment, but sometimes our poetry also, we want to write stuff that helps people and gives people comfort, and I think this poetry does this well. The fact that I just wrote well and drew an arrow, the poem does it well. Maybe a poem and the arrow is doing well. My scrawling doesn't always make sense to me either. Same. I think that's why I wrote this, to calm my nerves somewhat. Yeah, it sounds like it then calmed your nerves, it calmed my nerves, so like, it did its thing, you know? And maybe we can dig into that a little more. So let's say we're writing a poem that calms one's nerves over death. We want to do some critique. Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms. Like, that's beautiful, right? That's comforting. I'm not alone. For as long as there are birds in the sky, worms in the dirt, lizards on my fence. Beautiful, comforting things. Worms in dirt doing worm things. I love lizards. Lizard is like my spirit animal. Birds in the sky. I will never be alone. The world will always be full of life, and I must only step out my door to see it. The trees grow taller, the grass grows thicker, the flowers bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. But I'm not alone. For nature will always win in the end. Vines will one day climb the walls of my room. Birds will nest in my pillowcase, and irises will sprout in my carpet. But I must only live another day to see it. So, I circled two things in red. Left here and win. Because I'm not sure that these are comfy words. I think win is necessarily sort of an uncomfortable word here. Nature winning. Winning implies losing for someone else or something else. Not always, but it tends to. And I would say if we're trying to write a poem that is calming, as this poem very much is and does well at, then perhaps win is not the right exact vocabulary. Nature will always something. I don't even know if I have a replacement word, which makes me not very helpful. But you know, if we're thinking about a poem as a theme, and we want everything to contribute to that theme, then words that are sort of dissonant with that theme probably ought not be used. And I will be left here in this house, but I'm not alone. I think this is interesting. Like, being left here, like, necessarily kind of has a degree of solitude. Being left in the house, home alone, these kinds of thoughts, right? But what about I will be waiting in this house? This gives less a connotation of like, well, I'm like stuck in this house. I'm like doing the society thing. I've been left alone here, which is dissonant with the I'm not alone, I'm not alone, I'm not alone. Just from like my personal definitional interpretation of these words, right? And I'll be waiting in this house, but I'm not alone. Maybe that's better, maybe that's worse. I don't even know, because I like your version too. For nature will always win in the end. For nature will always return. Nature will always come. Nature will always open the door in the end. I don't know. Thoughts? And then just like, as a point of critique, I wrote it here, but irises. This would, so this is something I see a lot, just writing advice for people. Apostrophe means two things. There's no shame in like not knowing this, because I see people mess this up all the time. Iris, okay, apostrophe means, yeah, two things. Possession. I am Ginny, and something that I own is Ginny's. This never refers to multiple Ginnies. And I actually see people do this a lot with names. Let's say Ginny, right? There's one Ginny over there. Or my friend Ginny. I have two friends. They're both named Ginny. I have a lot of friends who are Ginnies. A lot of times people will do that, plural, of like something like that with the apostrophe. That's not necessary. And you capitalize iris, so maybe that's like part of the origin of that mistake. At least in American English. This is all I can speak for. I'm also totally like have this not quite on screen. I'm really bad at this, y'all. And then an apostrophe also indicates like a contraction or an implied letter that is not there. Don't, do not, right? That represents like the O. And that's important because you see that in like poetry sometimes. I used something, usually you'll see it a lot in like Old English and like sonnets and things with form. I used it in my poem, Train Track Confessional, and I had the word parallel. Parallel. That is 3 syllables. But I used the apostrophe as such, and that's how I wrote it in my poem. Parallel. Parallel. 2 syllables, right? How else would you write iris for plural? Irises. With an E. Yeah. That's like the little like grammar lesson. Not generally something I care to talk about, but it is like a super common mistake. So yeah. This I should make a TikTok of me teaching this, because low key it's such a common thing to do. But yeah, making sure every word operates for your poem. That's kind of what Bukowski says, not to just parrot Bukowski all the time, but that's who our sort of poet of interest is lately. Bim bim bim. As he says in the interview that we watched the other day, he says all of your lines, all of your poetry should go bim bim bim, bim bim bim. Right? Bim bim bim, bim bim bim, bim bim bim. Like it should move, right? That's its motion. But I think this is also to say that every line, every word should like contribute to the momentum of the poem. And if the momentum, so to speak, is to talk about death as this comforting thing, then you want everything in the poem to be comforting in relation to death. Unless you do want an undertone of discomfort, then don't do that. There's a reason I failed English. I literally almost replaced the E with an I in English. I'm not bad. It's okay. School, I think, is generally really, really bad and really not helpful at, like, teaching English and writing and all of these things. And part of why I like to do this on Twitch is because I know that this is a much more accessible place for people to kind of get some of this education compared to a classroom. Especially when classrooms aren't always accepting places, classrooms aren't always, or schools aren't always safe places. I like to think that classrooms are almost always safe because I'd say pretty much anyone who's teaching is really an amazing soul, unless they're like the creepy old man teacher who touches kids. They should be safe. Yeah. And this classroom, I guess, if you could call it that, is one where, you know, it's over the internet, it's fun, we joke. I feel like it's cozy and I try to make it safe, right? Because I don't want anyone to feel like that. And that's the unfortunate thing, right? Is that sometimes classrooms aren't, and sometimes schools aren't. And that's just another obstacle, and schools try to impose structure and rigidity. And schools also just teach archaic things sometimes and don't teach well and don't use engaging tools and media this to teach, right? So that's kind of what I try to do better. You know, if I can teach people English better than their English class, at least a few concepts, then that's a good thing. Obviously, I think you all should listen and pay attention in your English classes, because most English teachers are pretty cool. Not arson ashers, though. Will one day, what was it? It's covering it. Cradle me. Cradle me in her arms. Do you have any other questions, Drowning Devil, about this poem? Since I try to pay attention. My English teacher was the type to speed through lessons. And then yell when you asked her to slow down. That's unfortunate. Yeah, that's like a not safe space for learning. So I'm sorry to hear that, right? So not really. Was this helpful to you, Arson? Not you're Drowning Devil, not Arson Asher. They're both alliterative and followed by a number. Did this provide insight? It was very helpful. I'm glad to hear that. Helped me kind of start to wake up. I'm not talking like this anymore. So, that's something. In that case, I'm going to read this one more time, and that'll be the conclusion of our analysis of I appreciate your critiques. Glad you do. And that'll be the end of Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms. I am not alone. For as long as there are birds in the sky, worms in the dirt, lizards on my fence, I will never be alone. The world will always be full of life, and I must only step out my door to see it. The trees grow taller and the grass grows thicker. The flowers will bloom once again, and I will be left here in this house. But I am not alone. For nature will always win in the end. Vines will one day climb the walls of my room, birds will nest in my pillowcase, and irises will sprout in my carpet. I must only live another day to see it. Mother Nature will one day cradle me in her arms. By DrowningDevil12. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.